name is Ricardo Lorenz, and I want to share with you my wonderful yet brief journey composing for the cello. The Sphinx catalog of Latin American cello works available online now is a very important milestone in the promotion of so-called immaterial patrimony of Latin America. So Latin America has been very good at promoting its tangible patrimony. Landmarks like Machu Picchu or the Maya pyramids in Mexico, or the many incredible examples of colonial and also modernistic architecture that's sprinkled all around the continent. What it's not been able to do successfully is to promote the immaterial achievements of the continent, like music, for example. What this catalog provides is a window to the Latin American identity, but from the affect point of view, from the world of the emotions. I can't think of a better moment to launch such an initiative when there are some extraordinary established cellists and up-and-coming who are looking for repertoire. And through this catalog, they can experience not necessarily what Latin America looks like, but what it feels like. The great thing about my story writing for the cello is that each one of these 4 works I've composed during the past 20 years featuring the instrument is connected to a colleague or friend of mine. 2 of the works that I composed were commissioned by well-known Mexican cellist Carlos Prieto, an advocate and promoter of new works for the cello by Latin American composers. In 1998, I composed a work for cello and piano titled Cecilia and Azul y Verde that Carlos Prieto premiered and later featured in a CD that is also titled Cecilia and Azul y Verde. In 2006, Carlos Prieto commissioned a solo unaccompanied work for cello that I titled Open Borders, or Fronteras, abiertas, and it was meant to coincide with the release of his autobiography titled Adventures of a Cello, where he tells the story of his Stradivarius. In 2003, I was commissioned by a dear friend of mine, Andres Cárdenas, then concertmaster of the Pittsburgh Symphony, a work for 9 cellists to be premiered by the cello section of the Pittsburgh Symphony. I titled that work Rochela, which means party in Spanish, although I also call it raw cello, and raw cello means raw cello. Germán Marcano, the wonderful Venezuelan cellist, featured Rochela in a CD that is also titled Rochela. The last work, or the most recent work I've composed featuring the cello, is for an unusual combination of instruments, namely flute, bass clarinet, cello, and percussion. This work was commissioned by the National Flute Association, yet the cello part is as demanding or more than the flute part. Cecilia and Azul y Verde for cello and piano holds a very special place in my catalog of works. It was commissioned by well-known Mexican cellist Carlos Prieto, who also premiered the work in Caracas and later recorded it. It was meant originally as a portrait of my mother, Cecilia, but as I was in the middle of composing the work, she unfortunately passed away unexpectedly. So the piece changed dramatically in character midway. So now the work, I can best describe it as walking a fine line between moments of great fragility achieved through very high natural harmonics that are recurrent throughout the piece, and moments of great hardness, almost coarseness, that I create by using double and triple stops in the low end of the cello. There's a hellish passage in the third movement that I collide a so-called montuno, typical salsa music in the piano, with a passage that sounds like a Paganini etude of 30-second notes descending chromatically. In the end, the work is an homage to the contrast in my mother's emotional life. Rochela for 9 cellos was commissioned by former Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra concertmaster Andres Cardenas, a dear friend of mine, who commissioned it specifically for the cello section of the orchestra to premiere it. After the premiere, somebody described the piece as having a lot of pizzazz, a word that I never heard before. I thought it meant that it had a lot of pizzicato, which it does. I described the work as a piece of Gothic salsa because while it's very sophisticated harmonically, from the point of view of counterpoint, it behaves not unlike a salsa arrangement where all the parts are interlocking. At certain spots in the piece, I asked for the cellos to clap their hands. At other spots, I asked them to tap their laps. In the end, it's just a highly spirited piece of music that is meant as a jam session or a party for 9 cellos. Open Borders, or Fronteras abiertas, is an 8-minute tour de force for unaccompanied cello. The work was commissioned by Mexican cellist Carlos Prieto to coincide with the release of his autobiography titled Adventures of a Cello, where he tells the story of his famous Stradivarius. Because I didn't have Carlos around to guide me through the process of composing this work, and I usually like to collaborate with the musicians that I'm composing for, I relied on Venezuelan cellist Miguel Rojas, who is the current principal cellist of the Puerto Rico Symphony Orchestra. Miguel and I coincided during my early years as a faculty at Michigan State University. He was very generous, testing every single spot in the piece and either giving it his blessing or telling me how to completely rewrite it so it would remain idiomatic for the instrument. So I owe Open Borders to Miguel. The title Open Borders doesn't only refer to geographical boundaries, but more specifically to the conventional physical boundaries of the cello. I wanted a work that would behave more like a synthesizer, where it's very easy to shift from very high to very low registers or to shift between very different types of timbre. I also wanted a work that would utilize natural and artificial harmonics as melodic content and not only as effects. And I wanted to do all of this without compromising the fluidity and lyricism of the work. Most recently, my very good friend Horacio Contreras has exhaustively performed this work around the country. And his version of Open Borders is featured in an upcoming CD release containing my chamber works. So who are the cellists who have inspired me to compose for the instrument and have given me a sense for what the culture of the cello is? I have to start with 2 extraordinary Venezuelan musicians. One is Paul Desenne, who will also become one of the most influential Venezuelan composers. Paul Desenne, back in the 70s, when I was starting my music education, had a rock band that included the cello. And at the same time, I was singing in a choir who had as one of its members the wonderful cellist Germán Marcano. And I guess influenced by the fact that Paul Desenne had a band with a cello, we decided to put a band together that also had a cello that Germán Marcano played. Germán Marcano was also the very first person who took me to a classical music concert. It was a concert by the Venezuelan Symphony Orchestra. And that experience hooked me for life. I remember deciding back then and there that I wanted to be a composer for some strange reason. When I arrived at Indiana University in the early 1980s to study composition, I couldn't help to be influenced and impacted by the persona of the great late Hungarian cellist János Starker. János Starker was a close collaborator of my composition teacher and mentor, Juan Orrego Salas, who had composed several works for him that he premiered. One of my most fun memories is to watch János Starker backstage waiting to go in and perform the Dvorak cello concerto immediately after my concerto for orchestra was premiered by the Beethoven and Halle Symphony Orchestra in Germany, conducted by Dennis Russell Davis. I remember that I was walking out after greeting the audience after the premiere, and János Starker looking at me and congratulating me and saying, "It sounds like the audience liked it." And he was holding his cello about to go out to play Dvorak, which he did exquisitely well, of course. Later on, I've had the fortune of meeting two extraordinary Venezuelan cellists who also have impacted the way I think about the cello and inspired me to write for the cello. And those are Miguel Rojas, who helped me when I was composing my unaccompanied cello piece titled Open Borders. And a little while later, thanks to the fact that my son Niklas decided on his own to pick up the cello as his instrument when he was only maybe 4 years old or 5. I had the fortune of connecting my son with Horacio Contreras, who was actually finishing his doctorate at the University of Michigan. And Horacio was really the first teacher of Niklas, of my son. And eventually we have become very close, and he has recorded 2 of my works for cello. And I've learned an immense amount just watching him teach my son Niklas. And most recently, of course, yes, my biggest influence in the cello world is my son Niklas, who's only 14 years old. I should also mention, of course, that if it wasn't for the wonderful cellist Carlos Prieto, whom have not had the chance to be close to him because he lives in Mexico, and I've lived in the U.S. all throughout most of my career. He still has had an immense influence because he commissioned 2 of the works that are of mine that are performed to this day. I find that the cello is a string instrument that matches my voice type the closest. So I identify with the sound and the timbre almost as though I write for my voice, for me to sing these lines.